culture.
No, don't get me on that thing, because if I say something bad about my own home city, right, even by accident, that would be the end. That would be social death.
That would be okay. Now I think we're live, Tim, and so I'm going to just take over and do the introduction bit. And so at this time we're a few minutes past the start, so most of the hasty logging on will have happened with the Haven Home Safe staff, some of our colleagues from around Australia, indeed some of our colleagues from around the world. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that that I'm sitting, at least, on Jara land, the land of the Djadjarang tribes, for, as last time we could count, something approaching 45 to 50,000 of the past years, and land that was never ceded nor given away. And I acknowledge the elders, many of whom I'm friends with and know well, the current elders, those emerging, and those past, not only those present. And I acknowledge that many of our staff will be on other lands of other tribes who have occupied them for that period of time as well. So let me firstly welcome Tim Williams, and before I allow Tim to regale us with not only spectacular knowledge, incisive commentary and enormous wisdom, I just want to go through Tim's bio so you know who it is who's talking to you and talking at me. And so I've known Tim for, well, pretty much since he first came to Australia. Tim is the principal at a global advisory firm called Arup, A-R-U-P, and he's the head of what they call cities in the Australian region. But before joining Arup, Tim was the CEO for the Committee for Sydney. Now, every major capital city and some minor regionals have a committee for that Sydney. Let's not pretend that the big one in the group is the City for Sydney. Sorry, members of the City for Melbourne, but actually you're not quite there yet. But so Tim led that and became a very influential policy think tank. So Tim's work in the short time he's been in Australia has really shaped a lot of public policy and infrastructure planning, particularly in New South Wales, but also across Australia. And he is unlike some of us, he's a trusted advisor to government. So I think it's also really worth talking about what Tim did before he came to Australia. So unlike many of our forebears, he did not arrive in chains. So Tim actually was the CEO of the Thames Gateway Commission, which really developed up the east side of London in time for the Olympics, and did things like make the Channel Rail tunnel work better, and, you know, all that kind of, that thing that we hear tell of from time to time, that notion of integrating transport and housing and planning and like future planning. I mean, go figure, apparently it's been done before. So the other thing I wanted to say about Tim is that he's not only a specialist advisor on urban development, on city strategies, on governance and housing and planning, but he was actually an advisor to five successive UK ministers, including a Welsh regeneration minister, and he advised specifically the Mayor of London on housing. So Tim is a founding member of the Federal Cities Reference Group in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. He's a member of the New South Wales Government's Advisory Committee for Sydney's tech ecosystem. He's on the board of New South Wales Circular, which is about that circular, sustainable kind of economy thing. Again, something we hear tell of and see little evidence of. Tim is a prolific commentator with columns on public policy, housing, urban issues, occasionally bad choices in music, I might add. That features on the Sydney Morning Herald. He's in all the papers. He's on that tally. He's on the radio. He's basically everywhere. And he was educated at a Welsh school, which is unpronounceable in the English language.
It is.
And university in Cardiff, the Glamorgan Polytechnic, various other things. And he's the only person I know who's been both to Cambridge and Oxford. I mean, I've been there too, but I just visited to look around. So it's slightly different. The other thing about Tim that I'll finish on before we throw to him is the best way to think of this guy is we all hear tell about polymaths, but we rarely get to meet one. So Tim is kind of like the Dr. Carl of policy planning and transport. Welcome, Tim.
So I think that's enough for the end of the show now. By the way, you did miss one thing there, my friend.
What was
which
that?
was, no, well, you should know this, you see, because this is very important to me. In 1999, the Sunday Times said I was the 17th most important person in London that week, right?
Yep.
Very important. You've got to know who you're dealing with here. And it's hilarious. My friends never let me forget this. They just, whenever I go into a pub in London, they say, there's the 17th most important person. So what happened was, so I managed to, I was doing a deal. It's kind of a real thing. We managed to save engine making in Dagenham Ford in East London, right? So for that week, I was quite well known. Anyway, so the Sunday Times does this thing. And of course, I couldn't be the 18th because that was the Archbishop of Canterbury. So I beat the second most important person in Christendom, right? So but my trouble started when I beat the 19th. The 19th was Arsene Wenger, the manager of Arsenal. And my father was a big Arsenal fan. So he wrote a letter to the Sunday Times. And I'm telling you, this is true, right? I've got it on the wall, right? He sent a letter. I was very proud of it. He said, last week you said my son, Tim Williams, was the 17th most important person in London. Full stop, new paragraph. I have to tell you, my son Tim is not even the 17th most important person in my family. So that's who you're dealing with. I'm not even the 17th most important person in the Williams family.
Oh, that is a cracker. And also the fact that the Times published it, because they are scrupulous about what they publish, and some of the finest writing in history has turned up as letters to the editor there. They
obviously did their fact checking and found out who the other 16 members of the Williams family were and was satisfied.
That is absolutely precious. Tim, enough of this frivolity. Tell us about what you've been doing, particularly with Arup and cities. And give us a bit of an overview of your kind of connection with affordable housing, because that's really where we first kind of crossed paths.
Okay, so I might start there, Ken, if you don't mind. So I grew up in a public housing estate in Wales in the late 50s, early 60s. And as I tell people, I sent you a photograph of it just then, by the way, that it's a wacky thing, because it was in a mining village. Where of the 500 or 600 homes in the entire village, 80% would have been public housing. So and so I've never understood. For me, it was a fantastic upbringing, and I had an incredibly nurturing community that actually helped me get wherever I got to. So I came away with a very positive view of all that. So I ended up being very fascinated by public and social housing. But also because I was a kind of Labour government advisor back, I didn't know anybody in my upbringing that wasn't really a Labour guy. I used to joke to people. Ken, am I allowed to joke as well as say serious things in this webinar?
Has anybody ever stopped you?
No. So it's just that my community was so left of centre intrinsically, that even the Conservative club was run by the communists, because we didn't have any conservatives to run the club. So, so it was quite left-wing. So I ended up being an advisor, all that kind of stuff. And I used to go into meetings where I was the housing advisor in the UK, where there would be 21 people from the bureaucracy around the table talking about antisocial behavior on a public housing estate, And I'd stick my hand up and ask how many people there had actually lived in one. And the answer would be never, nobody. And so it was quite important, I think, that I could bring that experience to it. And so I became very interested in the housing market and a bit expert in the UK housing market. And then when I came to Australia, and I'd already been involved with Power Housing and our friends in Compass. And so, I carried on my interest, and I ended up working for the Committee for Sydney and being sort of using some of that expertise. On cities, I've been, I was somebody who got dazzled by the first city that they ever saw, and have been very interested in how they work and how they can work better. And I think we're having this conversation at a big, amazing moment in the history of cities, because I think the very future of the urban is up for grabs in the Western city model. That I'm currently advising my home city in Wales on the future, a kind of post-COVID strategy future. And I'm also at the beginnings of a kind of CBD task force kind of thing in Sydney, really. So it's a big moment, Ken, to have this conversation.
Yeah, and the social anthropologists talk about the liminal, and the liminal is the time between times. And many social anthropologists are saying this is where we are now. We are in a time between the end of one time and the start of a new time. And so, you know, I'm scrupulously now avoiding the term COVID normal, because there is nothing normal about COVID.
No, I'm really delighted.
Yeah, and COVID permanent, because I think that's where we are. And so I think it is time for us to start to rethink. And one of the things, I just want to make the observation about the 21 people sitting around the table, none of whom had ever come from a public housing estate. It is fascinating, if I step sideways for a moment, when you talk to educators, because they will tell you that everybody tells them about how education policy and pedagogy should work, because they all went to school. But actually, you know, there's a bit more to it than that, right? And so the same with housing policy. You know, everybody has a view on housing, because almost everybody lives in a house, or has grown up in a house, or bought a house, or invested in a couple of houses. But to run housing associations, to run estates, to build and hold and manage community within those things, very, very different skill set. But that's not what we're talking about today.
Well,
this new COVID permanent world.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, let's do that. Look, I love. There's a great thing that Antonio Gramsci, the Italian Marxist. I am one of the few people on the North Shore of Sydney who quotes these people. But he said, "The old has not yet died, and the new cannot yet be born." Yeah. And I think we are definitely in that moment. And I think it's a kind of moment where nobody quite knows. It's I don't want to sound decadent. It's kind of exciting at one level, you know, because you think, well, maybe we fundamentally got a reset situation on our hands here. So the answer is, what principles will guide us going forward, right? So I'm telling people there's a restart thing, but there may be stuff we can restart. What should we restart? There's a rethink sort of moment. There's a reset moment. I think you have to be, then it goes back to almost fundamental principles, and it's sort of an odd moment where maybe things have been so disrupted. That word that all the consultancies were using 5 years ago about stuff that turned out to be nothing,
yes.
Right? Yes. And now we know what bloody disruption looks like, right? So, but it is one of those moments where I can think again, and it's a scary thing. I think it's scary. It's interesting. I think one of the things that scares politicians most is not the management of the immediate, which is going, you know, I think more or less, you know, it's kind of we're absorbing it with difficulties, but it's still, you know, but it's how we transition to the next, and what is that? So I think, and that's why I've been pushing quite sort of radical ideas again, and I'm sure you have, around what we can do about social housing investment, because maybe those business models that prevented us from doing something are bust. I mean, I think the global housing market is an embarrassment. Yep. I think that I've been trying to explain to people that, you know, what we're supposed to think it's normal for house prices to go up 12 or 15% a year, then to crash 10 or 12% a year. We think it's normal that in 2017 in Australia we built 230,000 homes, which is crazy in itself, and now we're going to do 110. That's normal. No, it's not.
It's not.
This is a completely abnormal housing market that is totally unresilient and is totally inequitable. And it's a complete, in my view, embarrassment to the idea of Australia being an egalitarian society. So I'm in the radical camp at the moment, I can tell you.
So I'm right there with you on that. I mean, one of the things that out of one of your blogs or podcasts that I may have inadvertently tripped over, not that I'd go there to look, you know, deliberately,
no,
was the notion that your house was rising in price quicker per day than you could earn as a, can I say, modestly priced consultant.
Indeed. I could not believe it by sitting on my, it's well described, capacious backside, right? Yeah. I have been earning more in this house just by sitting here. It's absolutely insane, right? Now, the thing is that I think we also need to understand that the insanity is not inevitable. It's a policy choice that has been made to over-financialize property in this country. And I think, you know, I mean, I show charts, it's like amazing. Even I didn't know, you know, the 80% of bank lending in Australia is for property, whereas it's 50% in Germany.
Yep.
You know, and Germany's got like is reinventing industries all the time.
And not only that, you know, Germany has had, well, certainly West Germany and suffered since the annexation, but they had sensible housing policy. And so, you know, one of the strengths of their economy is that they're not over-investing in a good, an asset that in fact does nothing other than return shareholders to banks. Return profits to bank shareholders.
So we might as well get into this, because I've been trying to explain. Obviously, there's some problem with the way I explain. By the way, every time I say that, I think hang on, maybe it's me. Is the and by the way, in terms of pedagogy, I think it's important to doubt oneself. You see, right? We'll come back to all that because I think there's a very big problem going on with people being authoritarian in their certainty about stuff, and I'm against all that. Is that I try to point out that that if you've got a tax system that encourages people to be multiple homeowners, right? The logic is that there must be a renter. Right, so the idea that I forget, I'm not being like complicated here. You know that the taxing system we've got at the moment presupposes a renter, right? So the idea that everybody can become an owner of a home in Australia by policy implication is impossible, right?
Yep.
So they don't mean it. So I think we need to get over it. And I think we also, as you know, the whole idea that there's something wrong with renting. You know, when most societies is much more normal than we know. So we really have to build for good economic and social reasons, it seems to me. So I'm thinking that this is a moment where there is a possibility that it's an inflection point, a genuine one.
Yeah.
Where ideas that were rejected may come back, and this is one of the discussions, I think.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And so you can look at the housing policy and witness the collapse in every 10-year cohort across the spectrum that's happening at the moment in Australia, and also try and work that into a rising property market that is our best analysis will be it will plateau, but in some places it will, and then you mix in the overexposure of particularly the four big banks to residential mortgage-backed security markets on what has been this 3 decades of rising market. And as you say, the policy implication of being a home-owning nation is not borne out. And you're right. The issue is, Tim, that they don't mean it, but they don't even know they don't mean it because
this is the thing.
Not that level of sophistication, right?
This is the most fascinating thing about the political culture in Australia I discovered, without in any way, because as you know, Ken, I'm a very middle-of-the-road figure, that without being left or right about any of it, it does astound me the extent to which my liberal government friends, who I always thought the presiding virtue of their politics was they knew about business, seem to know bugger all about the housing business. And I explained, I remember going into somebody and saying, I've got a good story. By the way, as you know, attempting to be amusing is my way of attempting to be intelligent. This has to be understood, right? So it's, you're supposed to laugh, but you're meant to think, right? But I may not get there. There was a famous report in England called it's so famous, I can't remember the name of it now, the Kate Barker report back in about 24, 25, right? And it came out with this notion that in order for house prices to moderate, we needed to produce more homes, you see, which, as you know, is a huge myth that people buy everywhere, but it's completely untrue. And I know it's sort of, it's like one of those things you say to people, you do realize that you can't, it's just like you can't cut congestion on the roads by building more roads. You can't, reduce house prices by building more of them. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't
work that way.
They stop building them when the price comes down, as we are seeing now. So anyway, so as soon as I had the job in government of talking to the writer of this report and just working out what our response to her report should be. So I go and see her, and she's lovely. She's brilliant. She was on the monetary committee of the Bank of England. Like, she was a serious economist and a very nice person. Anyway, so I say, thank you very much for doing the report. It's really good. That's at last somebody who knows about land economics has done this report. She said, "No, I'm not a land economist. I'm like a financial economist." I said, "Oh, because you see, you've got to understand land. They've stopped making it, Ken. It's kind of right. So it's a very different thing. And the idea that you would have people in business and in government, we don't seem to understand the difference between these things, that you can't build your way to lower prices because it's a business where I will stop building when that happens. I once had a great moment. There's a guy who died. I'm loving this conversation, but I hope it's because I hope other people are as well. But
no, it's okay. People will start dropping off the screen if they're bored, and that's not happening at the moment.
It's all right. But it's a great story where I was the government advisor about 27, and we wanted to build more homes, and we were Blairites, so therefore we were kind of free market Labour guys. We were kind of, we were centre-right Labour guys, right? So we thought socialism's terrible. So, it's stopping the system working. And all of a sudden, we have the top the housing developers in the country. In England, it's different to Australia, where you've got the top 10 companies build about 50% of stock, right? They run the show, right? So it's almost quite like, you know, Marx talked about the governments as being the committees of the bourgeoisie, right? And I always used to think that was simplistic until I met them. You know, anyway, so anyway, so I'm there, and they're all there, and my minister's going, you know, he's David Miliband, he's meant to be the next leader of the Labour Party, he's, you know, so he's top guy, and he said, we want you to build 15% more, you know, blah, blah, blah. And they're all going, yes, and what do you want from us? We asked them, well, reduce planning obligations and, you know, simplify red tape and, you know, get rid of planning, which of course whose very purpose is to shape the market, right? So anyway, so we would say, yes, yes, you know, and all of a sudden, the top developer who died last week, Barclay Homes guy, brilliant man, a sort of Thatcherite thug who I loved, right? Anyway, so, because he talked like me, right? So he gets up and he says, I will not say the entire words he used because this is a family audience, right? But he said, Tim, they're all effing lying to you. This is, you know, I said, what do you mean, Ken? He said, that's not my business model. I won't build a brick unless there's 22% return on capital employed. This is not a manufacturing process, my friend, is what he said. And he was absolutely right. So we haven't got, I think whenever governments think they know what to do about the housing market, they don't really, and they only understand it really as a financial market.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there. And one of the kind of examples of that would be, we now, and as you would well know and have probably written about lots, we've got all the wrong size houses in all the wrong locations where the population and the demand is. Yeah. We have, you know, I think you wrote something recently about, you know, the notion of how powerful train lines are. Our train lines are surrounded by leafy suburbs with 4-bedroom homes on quarter-acre blocks, when in fact we actually need our mid to maybe even high-rise, if there's a place for that in a COVID permanent world.
Absolutely, no, absolutely right. I mean, there needs to be a better understanding of the land use and transport integration side of building great places. We know that people value living near, you know, 700 or 800 meters to a station, and we know why. There's an interesting, by the way, interesting moment about this, which is we've discovered that knowledge workers tend to live close to train stations, because if you're working with your hands, you tend to have much more localized markets. If you're working with your brain, you want to have access to a wider labor market. And so they live near train stations. That's pretty interesting. See, my job, Ken, gets me into like research in absurd and obscure areas, you know, of public life, and some of them lawful.
So in terms of some of those, you know, the research in the obscure areas, one of them is, of course, forecasting. And someone who has literally made their reputation out of long-range forecasting and then helping people to understand how to deliver that is, well, that's you. So with this new likely COVID permanent world, with the likely, some people say likely, exodus from the high-rise, you know, high-density apartment-style living in cities to perhaps idyllic regional locations that may look like Bendigo.
Well, the thing is, you see, Bendigo's, as we know, a marvellous place, and it's a good place for this discussion. Although you should point out to your fellow Bendigo patriots that I have put a pro-Ballarat image on my LinkedIn.
We're not talking about that.
I did that, you know, I did that deliberately, you know, for this. So anyway, but I think this is a really important point, right? This is a fundamental moment where we started the conversation by saying, is there a questioning of the urban going on, right? Now, there's a difference between the perception and the reality, but marketing kind of blurs these things anyway, right? So the perception is that high density cities go with the pandemic, right? In reality, the evidence of that is very shonky, but you can see the point, right? You can see the point. But because I would argue myself that Hong Kong has got very few cases and New York has got too many. And the difference between them is the management of their cities to some degree. So there is a kind of independent factor in this. However, I think people are also, there's a second related point though, which is, so there's the push away from density by the fear of the pandemic. And of course, we've also then discovered, like nobody believed, and I've never believed was possible, that the benefits of agglomeration economics go away in the digital era that we always used to doubt, Ken, that you needed to, when the first signs of a digital economy came 20 years ago, people were predicting forever that it would lead to decentralization, but it didn't happen, right? And the reason why it didn't happen is because we always thought, traditional economics said, that being close to other people with valued ideas and stuff was a value in itself. And so your PwCs would pay top dollar to be surrounded by other people like PwC, right? So they call it agglomeration, right? And I also added to that people like doing face-to-face deals. That's what we always assumed. I still may be true, by the way, but it's not as true as we thought it was, because the technology has enabled us to do what we're doing now, right? So I think there's a view in the market. My prediction would be my prediction is something like this, that the CBDs will not be totally evacuated, but they will be nothing like they are today. And I don't mean today, I mean like they were 10 minutes ago, as it were. I think we're looking at something like about a 30% shift in workers to home working that I think may not go back. I think we'll go to split working as a pretty normal thing. I think you're bound to see, therefore, some diminution in rents at CBD level, which is probably long overdue, but it's going to be an interesting thing. CBDs without people, without enough people to justify the sunk investment of a CBD, right? That's one way of putting it. And then the other side, I think, is split working means not just being at home, although that is obviously, but actually maybe I want to go to Bendigo co-working centre, where I can have 2 days a week sharing a bit of social life with other people, slightly socially distanced, but I go into Melbourne 2 or 3 days or 2 days a week, right? I do think that much more doable, by the way, in a Melbourne and Victorian sort of, where you've got these 2 or 3, you've got your Geelongs, you've got your Ballarats, you've got your Bendigos kind of as satellites. I think that split world is a real runner in your neck of the woods.
So it's interesting. So let me respond to that point in a second. But the first thing I have to say is, you would appreciate the perspicacious, if that's the word, foresight that our organisation and I in particular have to trends, Tim, because we just shut down our hub that was embedded in our organisation right at the time when moving to hubs will probably become, an issue du jour. But anyway,
some chief executives could get really disciplined for that kind of foresight. You know what I mean? It's kind of, but no doubt you're ahead of the pack. You see.
Let me not dwell on what may prove to be a terribly bad strategic decision. Let me dwell for a moment on the fact that if there is in fact, say, a 30, as some people are saying, a 30% reduction in particularly commercial rents overall, because there will be a 15 to 40%, no one can quite put their finger on it, lack of space. I think that, in our own small world, I suspect that where we will get to is that we will be rostering our staff to come into the office, on staggered rosters and these sorts of things, but it won't be because we need them there for productivity purposes. I think it will be because we need them there for socialisation and mental health.
Well, I think that's right, Ken. I think that's right.
More so than that,
I think the challenge is interesting. I think I think a couple of things about this. I think that I'm not as willing as many just to give up on the discussion about the benefits of agglomeration. I think we need a bit more thinking about what we do about our CBDs, because I think there's a kind of romantic. See, I always think this. People think you can have your strengthened regional centres and your suburban centres, which I would like, by the way, but it does nothing to damage the centre. It's rather like what I say, again, my attempt to be funny, Ken, I'm warning you, is that, it's all very well to talk about the strength of the suburbs, but the word tells you the meaning is sub of an herb, you see. So the idea is, right, so the herb needs to be there, right? So I'm a bit worried about that kind of thinking. However, if you were to say to me straightforwardly, do I think this moment will turn out to be, in a sense, a good investment in Bendigo and Ballarat and Geelong and those places? I definitely think so. I don't think it's bad for regional towns or metropolitan towns, and I do not think it's bad for that.
So the other thing too, in terms of agglomeration, I mean, just picking up your point about when digital waves came across us and tsunami-like swept all in front of them, and that certainly happened in the last 20 weeks. But I don't know if you read Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus. But what happened in the Bay Area in San Francisco, where actually the re-agglomeration has in fact now completely displaced all the people who are needed to service the very high wealth people who need to be there.
No,
right?
I love all this. And by the way, I must commend the otherwise flawed chief executive of Haven for his reading, because you may have made a bum decision strategically for your company and organization, but you do read well. I think I think it's important to learn from your reading, though, is the only thing I would say to you about this. I want to go back one step. I worry that this is the slight. There's two things I wanted to talk about. Me, Ken, me, right? One is my slight workerist tendencies, which would be laughed at by real workers I grew up with. There's no question. But I have slight workerist tendencies, sort of common sense, belief in the world, right? And their common sense, belief in their common sense. I think the second thing is that if you were to say to me, do I think the Australian model of city growth was entirely benign before this crisis? No, I don't think so, right? So, and I don't think this is some kind of, godlike punishment for the wrong model, but I do think it may show you the unresilience of the model, because we were hiding from ourselves. The over-financialization meant that we were overheating, becoming centers for rich people close to the center and poor people. We had a new model of poverty in which poor people lived in the suburbs, right? And by the way, right, and we had no idea how to manage that. It's very interesting, all our models, and it comes back to your core job in a way, all our models of inner city, poverty and social progression and management of all that had come from inner city models, where the density helped us manage these things. In a more dispersed universe, it was quite difficult to do that. And I think, so we didn't have the right model. I think the second thing is really exploded. I mean, Melbourne was growing at a pretty extraordinary rate of 125,000 people a year. I think that's 2,500 people a week, right? So I don't think anybody could do that well, by the way. I think we're doing quite well, but it's not really easy to do that well, it seems to me. Now that's stopped. I mean, I don't think we know the numbers yet, but I'm pretty certain, I'm predicting, that we won't see any growth in Melbourne in this year. For, if you weigh it all out and students have left and blah, 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 you might even have a few people less than you thought you had, right?
Yeah, well, I think you're right. I mean, and the numbers across Australia broadly, 500,000 visa migrants, boom, gone home. 500,000 students, boom, gone home. We've got 8 million tourists a year who occupied, not all of them stayed in motels.
Wow, yeah,
gone.
Amazing.
So you put all that together. Then the thing that no one's talking about, the rapid deformation of shared households with university students and hospitality workers. So you've got massive deformation, particularly in the inner suburbs where your hospitality workers and uni students live. So it'll be the same in places like Newtown and so forth up in Sydney, although, Tim, that's on the other side of where you live. I'm not sure you're aware of it.
They are working class people there, Ken. That's the
allegedly, Tim, allegedly.
Right. Okay. All right.
And so this household deformation, which people are not talking about, I find is, that I think we'll see a little bit of we know already that we're seeing increasing vacancy periods, decreasing rents for entities. So that march is on the way. What we haven't seen, and what we will see, is in those outer far-flung suburbs, this is where the JobKeeper and JobSeeker enhanced payments are keeping people in houses.
Yeah.
And
And this is right.
And services like mine, historically, they're in the inner suburbs. They're not in the outer suburbs. And so when these people start to hit crisis point, when they realise that actually they can now rent somewhere for much cheaper,
that's true,
than a house they can no longer afford, there will be this in and out migration. Now, much of it will come to regions, I think. So I don't think we've got a handle on.
No, I think this is profound. And again, I repeat, you may be pretty hopeless at actually managing your asset, but you're very, very well read. I mean, that is. I think people are underestimating this, Ken. I think my favorite analogy of all this, I've been trying it on and nobody's really getting it quite like, I amuse myself with these things, right? So this was, my analogy is of the guy who goes into the hospital because he has to have his leg off. And it's quite a familiar syndrome with people who do that. They think they can feel their toes, right? I think we can feel our toes, right? So that when really what's happening is we probably have 15% effective unemployment in Australia at this point in time. We probably have another 10% that are underemployed at this point in time. We've got zombie companies, probably 30% of them, probably half the cafes, bars, restaurants kind of people who will not be with us in October. I think major companies are going to get rid of people in sort of October. That's one thing. Then you've got this whole vanishing of people thing, right? When the very business model, the growth model was probably unsustainable, well, it's turned out to be, as they say, the definition of unsustainable is something that wasn't sustained, right?
Yeah.
So we're growing at a 1.5%, 2% a year, and it'll stop for the next maybe 5 years, right?
And so John Kehoe in the Fin Review yesterday wrote this excellent article about the impacts of deflation, which we'll begin to see, and we don't have time to touch that.
No, Japanese style property deflation.
Yes, but there's one question that I want to get to, Tim. But I just want to position this that in terms of where so much of the activity of organisations is, oh well, we've got COVID underway, but that's all right. We'll just proceed as business as usual, and we'll see our way through this. Kind of like a whole let's link arms and sing Kumbaya as we march off a cliff, lemming-like. So in my view, I think I wrote a report from a board back at the end of March, the start of April, that said this is a mass strategy extinction event for organisations. And
I think it's brilliant, Ken, because it's true.
Yeah, and I think what we do and what we need to do in communities won't change, but and some of the methods will still stay the same, although it will now largely be digital, but the volume, the demand and the location of our need will change dramatically. Yeah. But we probably don't have much more time to get into that, but I wanted to ask you one question, Tim, and we know that cities are changing, we know that locations are changing, we know that various, in Melbourne, they're frantically trying to put in new underground tunnels and things, but if someone made you the El Supremo planning and integrated logistics transport El Supremo for, I don't know, let's just say forever, but let's just go with a few weeks to start with. You had untrammeled powers. What would be the first 5 or 10 things that you'd look to take on?
Well, I think you have to understand my position on what creates cities Australian cities in the first place is a combination of roads and maritime services and the Property Council of Australia. Right. So I think whatever happens, we've got to disempower the Property Council of Australia by doing tax reform and making sure that housing is not quite the investment thing. So there's some policy things. I'm serious about that. I mean, I think we get nowhere unless we realise that the investor market is the problem in Australia, right? It's not about people buying a home. We all want, that's great. It's the investor market is the problem. And by the way, there is an answer, which is the Singapore housing system does 2 things, which is guarantees shelter to everybody, and you can leverage it twice in the market.
Yes.
But not 5 times, right? Twice. So that the housing, the amount of inflation in house prices over there is nothing like it is over here. So I think there's something wrong with that. I think we need policies around rediverting, making sure that people can get a good return from other things other than housing. So I think that's the biggest economic innovation. And it plays to what we need to do post-COVID, I think, which is to rediscover innovation, rediscover an economic activity rather than rent seeking and sitting on my fat backside in the northern beaches. So that's one. I think the second one I think is around restoring some confidence in the future of the urban, but understanding that it is now a bit more a networked version of the city, because that monocentric view that we had was leading to all sorts of distortions, including too high prices and all sorts of congestion and all that stuff. And Melbourne had a particular problem, even though it's had a huge advantage over decades in having a monocentric place that it wasn't so big that you could get to. And it's got this amazing, by the way, nobody really gets this, but it's got this amazing city centre that is almost infinitely expandable, whereas Sydney's got a very constrained one, which means that Sydney rents are twice what they are in Melbourne, right? And so it also means that great diversity you have in Melbourne of cafes, bars, restaurants can't be afforded in the Sydney model where financial services has driven out everything else. So there's something around this moment of COVID which actually might lead to a more benign Sydney CBD, more diversified. But I think we need to plan for that Melbourne has at least 3 or 4 polycentric, genuinely other points of development rather than just the monocentric one. I think we have to really restructure. I'm told that there's kind of opportunities around, believe it or not, sunshine as in Melbourne, you know, and the whole idea. I think that there should be a kind of restructuring of the city's economy so that you got jobs in some of these places. And I think there is an opportunity in the kind of diverse world we're heading for, where agglomeration economics may not work as well, where the idea of a more decentralized economy can work. So I think enabling that, by the way, through a good transport network, and I think we will get over our fear of mass transit, because you can't run cities without that. But I think also alongside a more active kind of transport push, I think. But then a little bit of detail around what happens around the stations, because we need to really reinvent the genuine 15-minute neighborhood idea. So I think there's something about transport, there's something about the restructuring of the city, and there's something around the financialization of the city. Without that shift, I don't think we can do this thing. But I actually think we might be at a radical point where, interestingly, it didn't take radical politics to get us there. It took life to get us there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and in a sense, you know, and I'm conscious that I'm going to have to wrap up because we'll have reached our 45 minutes. And
oh God, we've only just started.
I know. We could go for days, Tim. And also, I see that it's interesting, isn't it? The difference between the two of us, the public intellectual commentator and academic has a bottle of wine over his shoulder, whereas I have books. Who knew? How could that happen? But yeah. the point I wanted, I guess, to make in wrapping up is that we are in the midst now of possibly the most important work that we will ever have done in our lifetime.
People will remember this year, Ken. You're completely right. This is an absolute game-changing moment, a step change in our entire life. I'm thinking of doing every 10 years I pretend I'm writing a book. And this year, it's going to be called 2020 Vision, obviously.
Perfect, of course. I mean, one of the things that is kind of exercising my mind at the moment is the sense of loss, anxiety, grief, trauma that people are experiencing, and what that will mean in our workplace. Because, you know, we've had this kind of emergency, oh my God, COVID, what are we going to do? Yeah. Let's all work from home. Then we have oh my God, we're all working from home. How do we manage that? How do we look after each other? How do we touch base, try and keep the machine running? And now we've moved into, well, actually, this isn't going anywhere for a long time. We need now to think about this. And so it occurred to me that as particularly in Victoria with what they're erroneously, I think, referring to as a second wave, it's really just the first one that's taken off. Just took a little
I think you're right. Yeah.
But, you know, I look at I've worked through 3 major bushfires, 2 major floods in my working career. And so I've seen the impact of these mass traumas on small populations. And we know that, you know, basically the way people deal with this falls roughly into thirds. About a third of people, after a while, they sort of dust themselves off, get up and go, righto, well, that's no good. Well, we just best make the most of it. And off they go.
Yeah.
The next third of people kind of, they're not sure how they're going to deal with this. They need a bit of help, a bit of support, a bit of counselling, a bit of a push to get back on their feet, and off they go again. And that last third, essentially, they never get over it. Some will revel in the trauma. Some are literally so traumatised that they can't break out. And we need to find ways to help them. And so I think in workplaces, we've got to get that first third up and running, get them to help the second third, and then collectively we need to help the remaining third, if you like, to understand what this COVID permanent world looks like, and at least from an employer point of view, what we can do to help people get back on the horse.
Have we got 1 minute? Have we got a minute?
Yeah, we've got a minute for sure.
Yeah, okay. So what I was going to say, well, I agree with all that, and I think it's very wise, and I think it's very good. And I think what I was going to say was, I discovered something yesterday. I'll reveal it to our friends. You know, I never thought of it till yesterday. The part of the problem, this is my slightly workerist, slightly trade union background coming out of me, Ken, is so my uncle was on the national executive of the National Union of Mine Workers, just to be clear, right? Just to be, you know. So when I was a kid, somebody once asked me about politics, and I said I wanted the South Wales Miners Federation to run the world, right? You know, so that's who I am. But where I was thinking about this was the companies. This is very interesting, and I had never thought about it till yesterday. Part of the problem with the CBD collapsing is because companies are thinking introspectively, even in the best sense, about their staff. They're thinking about their staff and they're thinking about their efficiency. They're not thinking about the community in a direct sense. They don't mean ill. It's not that at all. It's that they become very much within the walls of the company, and therefore not paying enough attention to the externality problem, which is that if they all do that, right, this is the tragedy of the commons in an odd way, right? They all do that, it kills places, right? So whatever we do, we need to now switch on the second sort of thinking. How do we restore the social?
Yeah.
Not be efficient, restore the social, right?
We need the three lenses, you know. We need business, we need community, we need neighbourhoods. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and my only last thing is a personal thing, which I will end with. I promise to go. I promise to go away now. Is a great thing I read by a Scottish guy who came off a council housing estate to go in Cambridge, and about 5 years before I was there. But he said a brilliant thing, which I wish I'd written. You know, and he said this, and this is paradoxical. And you have to listen, Ken, right? Because you have to pay attention to this. Is that he says, it wasn't until he went to Cambridge that he realized that it wasn't just working class people who read books. That was my experience. I grew up in a community with working class people who read books, right? And everything I have ever done is because I came from that community. Nothing else has changed me at all, as I hope you can tell, right? So,
well, on that note, Tim, I think if the South Wales Miners Federation had in fact run the world, we might not be in the situation we're in now.
That's my view.
Tim, I have to go. We have to wind up. Thank you so much for sharing your wit, your wisdom, and some of your thoughts about where we find ourselves in this strange time.
We do.
Stay safe, my friend.
Thank you for inviting me.
We'll spill some wine together sometime soon.
We will. Bye-bye.
Bye now.